Physics doesn't lie. Friction, gravity, torque, those are the only laws I answer to. My name is Hutch, and I operate a 50-ton Century Rotator. I'm the guy the highway patrol calls when an 18-wheeler jackknifes on black ice or a tanker rolls into a ravine. I don't move freight. I move the wreckage left behind when physics decides to punish a driver. But the job I took last night at the Devil's Elbow wasn't about physics. It was a blizzard, the kind that shuts down state lines. The sheriff called me directly, not dispatch, and his voice was shaking. He told me an armored transport with no license plates had gone over the rail and dropped 80 feet into the dark. He told me the driver was missing. He told me the crash looked wrong. I took the job because I thought I was recovering a vehicle. I thought I was just dragging 80,000 pounds of dead steel out of the woods. I was wrong. When I rappelled down to the wreck, I saw that the windshield hadn't been smashed in by a tree. It had been blown out from the inside, and when I climbed back up to my rig to haul it out, my rotator wouldn't start. An animal will slash a tire. An animal will bite through a hose. But the thing that was waiting for me in the tree line, it knew how to unscrew a fuel line. The temperature gauge on the dashboard of my Kenworth W900 was reading 5 degrees below zero, but the wind chill out in the Missouri dark was pushing it closer to 30. The cab was vibrating with the low, rhythmic thrum of the 600-horsepower Cummins diesel engine, a sound that usually lulled me into a sense of security. Tonight, it just sounded like a heartbeat in a dead body. I wasn't hauling freight. I don't move boxes. I move the things that move boxes. I operate a Century 1060 Rotator. It isn't a tow truck. It's a 50-ton twin-steer recovery crane mounted on a specialized chassis that costs more than most people's mortgages. When a semi-truck jackknifes on black ice or a tanker rolls over into a ravine, the highway patrol doesn't call a pickup truck with a chain. They call me. I'm the guy who brings the physics equation to a car crash. I deal in leverage, fulcrums, and the sheer strength of 7/8-inch steel cables. I was parked on the shoulder of State Route 19, idling the big engine to keep the hydraulic fluid from turning into jelly. The blizzard was hammering the windshield, plastering the glass with a sheet of white that the wipers were fighting a losing battle against. I was waiting for the county plows to clear a path north, drinking coffee that had gone lukewarm an hour ago. The police scanner mounted under my dash was usually a chaotic symphony of chatter on a night like this, troopers calling in slide-offs, salt trucks coordinating runs, dispatchers managing the chaos. But tonight, the airwaves were dead. Just the hiss of static and the occasional phantom voice drifting in from 3 counties over. That silence should have been my first warning. When the radio goes quiet during a storm, it means everyone is either hunkered down or dealing with something so bad they don't want to put it over the air. The CB radio crackled, the sudden noise cutting through the hum of the heater like a gunshot. Breaker 19 for the big wrecker. You got your ears on, Hutch. I frowned, putting my coffee down. I recognized the voice immediately. It wasn't my dispatcher. It was Sheriff Caldwell. I'd pulled his cruiser out of the mud more times than I could count, usually followed by a handshake and a joke about his driving skills. We had a professional understanding. He cleared the scene, I cleared the road. But tonight his voice sounded tight, thin. The jovial drawl of the Ozarks was gone, replaced by a clipped, professional urgency that made the hair on my arms stand up. I keyed the mic. I'm here, Sheriff, just watching the snow pile up. You got a mess for me. I got a situation at the Devil's Elbow, Caldwell said. There were no jokes about the weather. Mile marker 44. A heavy transport unit went over the rail. It's deep, Hutch. Looks like it fell about 80 feet into the ravine. I whistled low, looking out at the swirling white void. The Devil's Elbow was a notorious stretch of asphalt, a hairpin turn carved into the side of a limestone bluff. In the summer, it was a tourist trap. In a blizzard, it was a suicide run. 80 feet, I shifted in my air ride seat. If he went over there, you don't need a tow truck, Sheriff. You need a coroner. That's the thing, Caldwell replied, the static hissing around his words like snakes. My deputy rappelled down to check the cab. Driver's gone. Seatbelt is cut clean through. No blood in the cab, but the truck. Hutch, you need to see this truck. It's armored, blacked out, no plates, and the trailer is sealed tight. Armored, I sat up straighter, like a bank truck. Bigger, look, I can't leave it out here. The roads are closed, but if this storm breaks by morning, civilians are gonna see it. The feds are already asking questions about a missing asset in this sector on the secure channel. I need it gone tonight. Can that rotator of yours lift it? I glanced at the load chart taped to my visor. My rig was rated for 120,000 pounds if I set the outriggers on solid ground. If I can get close enough to the edge, I said, my mind already working the geometry. But Caldwell, if the feds are looking for it, why are you calling me and not them? Why aren't we waiting for a tactical recovery team? There was a long pause on the radio. The silence stretched out, filled only by the wind howling around my mirrors. Because the feds aren't here yet, Caldwell whispered, his voice barely audible over the static. And I don't like what I'm seeing through the binoculars. There are tracks around the wreck, Hutch, in the snow. Tracks? I asked. Driver walk away. No, Caldwell said. Whatever made these tracks didn't walk away, it ran, and Hutch, they aren't human. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature settled at the base of my spine. I looked at the dark tree line bordering the highway. I'm a rational man. I believe in weight ratings and breaking strength. But the woods in this part of the state are deep, and old stories hold on like burrs. I'm on my way, I said, putting the truck in gear. Give me 30 minutes, and Sheriff, keep your windows up. Copy that, Caldwell said, and the line clicked dead. I released the air brakes, feeling the massive chassis shudder as the torque hit the drive shaft. I wasn't doing it for the money. The county took 6 months to pay invoices, and I wasn't doing it for the thrill. I was doing it because Caldwell was a good man who sounded terrified, and a truck with no plates going off a cliff in a blizzard was a puzzle I couldn't ignore. I flipped on my overhead strobes. Amber light exploded into the darkness, turning the snowy world into a pulsing, chaotic tunnel. I steered the beast onto the unplowed highway, the heavy lug tires crushing drifts into powder. I drove south, pushing the 50-ton machine through the storm. I thought I was just going to pull a wreck out of the woods. I thought it was just dead weight. I didn't know I was driving into a crime scene that had started 1,000 miles away. I didn't know that the truck at the bottom of that ravine wasn't just a vehicle. It was a cage, and whatever had been inside it hadn't crashed. It had escaped. Mile marker 44 appeared out of the white void like a ghost, a flash of reflective green metal that vanished as quickly as the headlights swept past it. I eased off the throttle, letting the Jake brake rumble the 50-ton rotator to a crawl. The GPS on my dash was screaming that I had arrived, but my eyes told me I was in the middle of nowhere. The road here curved sharply to the left, the infamous Devil's Elbow, where the asphalt hugged the limestone cliffs on one side and dropped off into a black abyss of cedar and rock on the other. I saw the blue strobe lights first. Sheriff Caldwell's cruiser was parked perpendicular to the flow of traffic, blocking both lanes. The car was caked in ice, the exhaust puffing white clouds into the gale. He didn't get out as I pulled up. He just flashed his high beams once, a nervous, jittery signal. I pulled the air brake, the sudden hiss sounding loud in the quiet cab. I didn't kill the engine. In temperatures like this, you don't turn off a diesel unless you plan on staying until spring. I grabbed my heavy maglite, zipped my Carhartt jacket up to my chin, and stepped out into the storm. The wind hit me like a physical blow, carrying ice crystals that stung exposed skin like sand. I lowered my head and walked to the edge of the roadway. The sheriff was right. Someone had gone over. The guardrail was sheared off cleanly, a 20-foot section of galvanized steel missing entirely. but it was the tracks in the snow leading to the edge that made me pause. I shined my light on the asphalt. The tire marks were deep, cutting through the packed ice down to the pavement. They went straight off the edge. There were no swerve marks, no stuttering skip patterns from an ABS system pulsing to find traction, no frantic yaw marks from a driver trying to correct a slide. Whoever was driving that truck hadn't tapped the brakes. They had floored it. I walked to the jagged edge of the precipice and looked down. The darkness below was absolute, a swallowing void that my flashlight beam couldn't penetrate. I needed more candle power. I climbed back onto the deck of the rotator. I moved to the control panel on the side of the rig, flipping the toggles for the rear scene lights. Two banks of high-intensity LEDs, brighter than a stadium array, flooded the ravine with stark, artificial daylight. The shadows of the trees stretched long and spindly against the snow, looking like skeletal fingers grasping at the light. And there it was. Resting on its side about 80 feet down, wedged between two massive limestone outcroppings, was the rig. It wasn't a standard dry van, and it sure as hell wasn't a reefer unit hauling produce. The tractor was a custom job, matte black with a heavy-duty brush guard that looked more like a cattle catcher on a steam train. The trailer was seamless steel, riveted and reinforced, with no side doors. It looked like a bank vault that had grown wheels. The truck had taken a beating on the way down. I could see where it had sheared the tops off 3 pine trees, snapping trunks the size of telephone poles like they were toothpicks. The cab was battered, the exhaust stacks twisted into pretzels, but the trailer, the containment unit, as the sheriff had hinted, looked untouched. Not a dent. I reached into the cab of my truck and grabbed my binoculars, wiping the lenses on my shirt. I needed to see what I was dealing with before I started rigging lines. If this was a hazmat load, there would be placards. I focused the lenses, dialing in the zoom until the wreck filled my vision. I scanned the side of the trailer, looking for the diamond-shaped warning stickers. Nothing. No flammable gas, no biohazard, no radioactive trefoil. Just black steel that seemed to absorb the lead light rather than reflect it. It had no license plate on the bumper, no dot registration numbers on the door. In the trucking world, a ghost truck like that doesn't exist unless it belongs to Uncle Sam or someone who pays Uncle Sam to look the other way. Then I saw the logo. It was on the door of the tractor, faded, barely visible against the dark paint, scoured by wind and road salt. It looked old, like it had been applied years ago and left to rot. Iron Creek Logistics. Northern Division. I lowered the binoculars, a frown creasing my forehead. Iron Creek. That sounded Canadian. I racked my brain, pulling at the threads of memory from the trucker forums and the late-night CB chatter. I remembered hearing about a logging outfit up in the Yukon or northern Alberta that went bust a while back. There were rumors, crazy stories about a land dispute, a quarantine, a siege that shut down an entire valley. But this wasn't a logging truck. There were no bunks for timber, no grapple loader. This was an armored transport designed for high-value assets. Why was a truck from a defunct Canadian logging company running a Black Ops armored route through the Missouri Ozarks in the middle of the night? The wind howled up from the ravine, carrying a sound that made the hair on my arms stand up beneath my coat. It wasn't the groan of metal settling or the snap of a tree branch. It sounded like a heavy door slamming shut deep in the woods, followed by a silence that felt heavy and expectant. I looked back at the sheriff's cruiser. He still hadn't gotten out. He was watching me through his windshield, his face pale in the strobe lights. I tossed the binoculars back onto the seat and grabbed the heavy chains from the side box. I didn't like it. I didn't like the lack of skid marks. I didn't like the look of that armored trailer, and I definitely didn't like the fact that an Iron Creek truck was sitting dead in my backyard. But I had a job to do. I stepped to the control panel on the side of the rotator and engaged the outriggers. The hydraulic legs extended, biting into the frozen asphalt, lifting the 50-ton truck slightly off its suspension to create a solid anchor. I was committed now. I clipped the carabiner of the winch cable to my harness and backed toward the edge of the cliff. Looking down at that black steel coffin resting in the snow, I had a feeling that hooking it up was going to be the easy part. The hard part was going to be figuring out why a truck from the frozen north had decided to die here, and what exactly it had been transporting that was important enough to build a vault on wheels. Gravity is a constant. It doesn't care if you're a hero or a coward. If you slip, you fall. That's why I don't rely on luck. I rely on a pencil-eyed descender and 11 millimeters of static kernmantle rope. I stood at the edge of the asphalt, the wind whipping the tail of the rope into the darkness below. My hands moved with the mechanical precision of 20 years in the field. I doubled back the harness buckle, checked the locking gate on the carabiner, and gave the anchor point on the rotator's bumper a hard yank. Solid. The rig weighed 50 tons. It wasn't going anywhere. I clipped the descender to my chest harness. The aluminum was cold enough to burn my fingers through my gloves. I looked back at Sheriff Caldwell's cruiser. He was still sitting inside, just a silhouette behind the wipers. He wasn't coming down. He wasn't even getting out to spot me. That told me everything I needed to know about how bad this situation was. Going under, I muttered to no one, stepping backward off the ledge. The transition from the highway to the void was jarring. 1 second I was in the wind-scoured world of the blizzard. The next I was dropping below the lip of the ravine, protected from the gale. The noise of the storm didn't vanish, but it changed. It became a distant, muffled roar above my head, like a train passing over a bridge. Down here in the cut it was quiet, too quiet. I controlled my descent, feeding rope through the device, lowering myself 10 feet at a time. My boots kicked against the limestone cliff face, dislodging clumps of snow and frozen mud that tumbled silently into the dark. The high-intensity floodlights from my truck above cast long, erratic shadows down the ravine. The light caught the falling snow, turning the air into a shimmering curtain of white dust. Through that curtain, the wreck rose up to meet me. Up close, the truck was even more intimidating. It was a monolith of matte black steel, lying on its passenger side like a slain dragon. The trees it had crushed were splintered and pinned beneath it, their fresh sap smelling sharp and piney in the cold air. But beneath the pine, there was something else. A faint, underlying odor that I couldn't place yet. I touched down in the snow about 10 feet from the tractor's nose. I unclipped from the rope but left the harness on. Rule number 1 of recovery: always have an exit strategy. I waded through thigh-deep drifts toward the cab. The silence here was heavy, pressing against my eardrums. I expected the ticking of a cooling engine, the hiss of a leaking radiator, the drip of fluids. But the wreck was stone cold. It hadn't just happened. This truck had been down here for hours. I shined my maglite onto the hood. The damage was catastrophic, but weirdly specific. The brush guard was twisted, sure, but the grille wasn't impacted deep enough to suggest a head-on collision with a tree at speed. It looked more like the truck had been pushed. I moved to the windshield, or rather, where the windshield used to be. Physics is the law, and car crashes follow specific rules. When a truck hits an immovable object, inertia throws everything forward. The driver, the coffee cup on the dash, the loose change, it all flies toward the impact zone. The windshield usually shatters inward if it hits a tree, or spiderwebs if the driver hits it. I ran my gloved hand over the rubber gasket of the window frame. There was no glass in the cab. I turned and shined my light onto the snow in front of the hood. There, scattered across the white drift like diamonds, were thousands of cubes of tempered safety glass. They had been blown out. The force hadn't come from the outside. It had come from inside the cab. Something had generated enough pressure or enough violence to blast the laminated glass outward onto the hood. "Airbag?" I whispered, checking the steering wheel. The airbag had deployed, hanging limp and deflated like a dead lung. but an airbag doesn't blow a windshield out. I climbed up onto the side of the cab, my boots slipping on the slick metal. I shone my light down into the driver's compartment. "Driver, you in there?" Silence. The cab was empty, but it wasn't clean. The interior looked like it had been put through a blender. The dashboard was gouged, the plastic trim ripped away to expose the wiring harness underneath. The CB radio was hanging by its cord. I focused on the driver's seat. The seatbelt was still clicked into the receiver. The nylon webbing hadn't frayed or snapped from the tension of the crash. It had been sliced, a clean, diagonal cut severing the strap. I leaned in closer, balancing on the door frame. There was no blood, no splash patterns on the dash, no smears on the upholstery. If the driver had been hurt, he hadn't bled here. Then the smell hit me. It wasn't the pine sap anymore. It wasn't diesel fuel or antifreeze. It was a thick, metallic stench that coated the back of my throat, tasting like a mouthful of dirty coins. It smelled like ozone, the sharp, electric scent of a lightning strike, mixed with old, dried copper. I froze, my hand gripping the door frame. I had smelled this once before, years ago, when I pulled a car out of a creek in a thunderstorm where a transformer had blown. But this was organic. It was musk. It was the smell of a wet animal, magnified 1,000 times, mixed with the smell of a slaughterhouse floor that had been scrubbed with bleach but never quite got clean. My lizard brain, the part of me that evolved to run from saber-toothed cats, woke up and started screaming. Predator. I slowly pulled my head back out of the cab. I shined my light around the perimeter of the wreck. The snow was undisturbed near the cab, except for the tracks leading away that the sheriff had mentioned. I looked at the Iron Creek logo on the door again. The faded white letters seemed to mock me. I reached for my radio to call Caldwell to tell him that he was right, that this was a crime scene and I was pulling out. But as I keyed the mic, a sound drifted down from the darkness above. It wasn't the wind. It was the sound of metal groaning under tension. I looked up at the cliff edge, 80 feet above. The floodlights from my rotator flickered once, then buzzed. I wasn't alone in the ravine, and whatever had blown that windshield out, it wasn't the driver. I knew I should have climbed back up the rope right then. Every instinct I had, every alarm bell in my head was telling me to leave the wreck and let the snow bury it. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, especially when it's mixed with professional habit. I needed to release the air brakes. If I was going to tow this thing, or even if I wasn't, I couldn't leave the maxi brakes locked. It would turn a recovery into an anchor dragging contest. I swung my legs over the door frame and dropped into the cab. The floor was angled steeply, forcing me to brace my boot against the center console to keep from sliding into the passenger well. The smell was overpowering in here, trapped in the confined space. It made my eyes water. It wasn't just ozone and copper. There was a rot underneath it, sweet and cloying. I reached for the yellow diamond-shaped parking brake valve on the dash. It was smashed. The plastic knob was shattered, leaving only the brass stem. "Great," I muttered, my voice sounding flat and dead in the small space. I shined my light around the interior, looking for the release tool usually kept under the seat. The beam swept across the dashboard, highlighting the devastation. The sleeper berth curtain was torn down, revealing the bunk area. The mattress was shredded, foam stuffing exploded everywhere like yellow snow. The storage cabinets were ripped open, their doors hanging by twisted hinges. This wasn't crash damage. The truck had fallen on its right side. The damage to the cabinets on the left wall defied gravity. They had been pulled open. My light caught a glint of silver wedged between the defroster vent and the windshield frame. It wasn't a piece of trim. It was a small, rectangular device, jammed deep into the crack as if someone had desperately tried to hide it before whatever happened. I reached out, my thick gloves making it clumsy work, and pried it loose. It was a digital dictaphone. An old model, silver plastic with a small LCD screen that was cracked but still functional. I held it in my palm, my thumb hovering over the play button. This was the black box. This was the answer to why a ghost truck was dead in my ravine. I pressed play. For a second there was only static. Then a voice cut through, breathless and distorted, as if the speaker was running or hiding in a small space. Cut the fence. I repeat, the perimeter is gone. The voice was terrified. It belonged to a man who knew he was already dead. This is Gordon, Iron Creek Security. If you find this audio file, God help us. We thought the fence would hold them. We thought the voltage was enough. We were wrong. Gordon. The name triggered a memory from the news, or maybe a forum post I'd read years ago about a missing persons case in Canada. The recording crackled with a loud mechanical noise in the background, the sound of a diesel engine idling and something else, a heavy, rhythmic thudding against metal. They didn't just break out, Gordon's voice whispered, dropping to a frantic hush. They learned. They watched the trucks leaving the camp. They watched the logistics runs. They know the route. They aren't just hunting anymore. They're migrating. I felt a cold sweat break out under my heavy coat. Migrating. We loaded the transport, Gordon continued, his voice shaking. Standard procedure for Sector 4 relocation, but the Alpha, he didn't fight the sedative, he waited. He waited until we were on the highway. He's in the trailer and the others. They're following the truck. They're following the scent of the Alpha. They're heading south. There was a screech of metal on the recording, loud enough to make me wince. Then, a voice that definitely wasn't Gordon's. It was a low, guttural chittering sound, like wet stones grinding together. "Burn the truck," Gordon screamed, his voice peaking and distorting. "Do not open the doors. If you find this, burn it. They are heading to the warm states. They are." The recording ended abruptly, with a wet crunch that sounded sickeningly like a radio being crushed in a fist. I stared at the device in my hand. The timestamp on the LCD screen was from 2 days ago. Iron Creek, Sector 4, migration. The puzzle pieces slammed together in my mind, forming a picture I didn't want to see. This truck wasn't hauling bank deposits. It was hauling a prisoner, an Alpha. And Gordon, whoever he was, had tried to warn the world that the prisoner had an escort. "They're following the truck," I whispered, repeating the words. I looked out the gaping hole where the windshield used to be. The snow was falling harder now, filling the ravine with silence. If the Alpha was in the trailer, where was the escort? I shoved the dictaphone into my jacket pocket. I didn't care about the air brakes anymore. I didn't care about the recovery fee. I needed to get out of this cab. I needed to get up that rope, fire up my rotator, and put 100 miles between me and mile marker 44. I scrambled out of the cab, slipping on the snow-covered hood. I hit the ground running, wadding through the drifts toward my rope. The floodlights from my truck above were still flickering, casting erratic shadows that seemed to dance in the corner of my vision. I reached the rope and clipped my ascender onto the line. I didn't bother with a safety check. I just wanted up. I hauled myself up the first 10 feet, my boots scrabbling for purchase on the limestone. Then the lights went out. Not a flicker, not a buzz. The high-intensity lead banks on my rotator, 80 feet above, simply died. The ravine plunged into absolute, suffocating pitch blackness. I hung there on the rope, suspended in the void, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The only sound was the wind and the sound of my own ragged breathing. Then from the darkness below me, from the direction of the wreck I had just left, came a sound. It was the click of a door latch opening. The ascender is a simple mechanical device. It's a metal cam with teeth that bites into the rope when you weigh it and slides up freely when you unweight it. Slide, stand, slide, stand. It's a rhythm I've practiced 1,000 times in training yards and on sunny cliffs. But doing it in pitch blackness, 70 feet above a wreck that just opened its own door, turns the rhythm into a frantic, desperate scramble. I hauled myself up the static line, my breath coming in ragged, freezing gasps. My boots scrabbled against the limestone face, knocking loose stones into the void. I didn't stop to listen for them to hit the bottom. I didn't want to know if they hit snow or if they hit something that was looking up at me. Every muscle in my upper body burned. The wind howled at the lip of the ravine, a roaring threshold I had to cross to get back to the safety of the world I understood. I could feel the vibration of the rope in my hand, a subtle, harmonic hum. Was it the wind, or was something down there touching the line? I grit my teeth and surged upward, cresting the edge of the asphalt. I rolled over the guardrail ruins and collapsed onto the snow-covered shoulder of Route 19. I didn't kiss the ground. I scrambled to my feet, unclipped the rope from my harness without even bothering to coil it, and sprinted for the rotator. The highway was a different kind of nightmare. The blizzard had intensified, reducing visibility to zero. The amber strobe lights on my truck were still pulsing, cutting rhythmic slices through the whiteout, but the massive rear scene lights, the ones that had illuminated the ravine, were dark. I looked toward Sheriff Caldwell's cruiser. It was still parked across the lanes, but it was dark now. No running lights, no interior dome light, just a mound of snow shaped like a Ford Explorer. "Sheriff," I yelled, the wind snatching the word away instantly. No answer. I reached my truck. The Kenworth was a dark monolith in the storm. I grabbed the door handle, ripped it open, and threw myself into the driver's seat. The sanctuary of the cab felt like a church. It smelled of coffee and diesel, smells that made sense. I locked the door. My hand was shaking so bad I fumbled the keys twice before jamming them into the ignition. "Come on, old girl," I whispered. "Don't let me down." I turned the key. The starter motor whined, spinning the massive internal assembly of the Cummins ISX-15. The engine turned over with a heavy, rhythmic chug, shaking the whole cab. Nothing, no catch, no roar, just the hollow sound of a dry engine trying to drink air. I stopped, my heart sinking into my boots. A diesel engine needs three things to run: compression, air, and fuel. My batteries were strong. The starter was spinning fast. The air intake was 10 feet off the ground, unlikely to be clogged. That left fuel. "Gel," I hissed, slamming my hand against the steering wheel. It was 5 below. If I had gotten a bad batch of diesel with high water content, the fuel filter could have waxed over, choking the lines. It happened to rookies. It didn't happen to me. I ran heavy-duty anti-gel additives in every tank from November to March. I tried again. Dead. I looked out the windshield. The amber strobes flashed against the wall of snow. Flash, dark, flash, dark. If I stayed in the cab, I would freeze. If the sheriff was gone, and my gut told me he was either gone or dead, I was the only heat source for 10 miles. I needed that engine running. I grabbed the heavy tire knocker from under my seat, a 2-foot length of hickory weighted with lead. It wasn't a rifle, but it was better than a prayer. I zipped my collar up, grabbed my maglite, and opened the door. The cold hit me instantly, stripping away the residual heat of the cab. I jumped down to the running board, then to the asphalt. I moved to the driver's side fuel tank first. It was a 150-gallon polished aluminum cylinder. I shined the light on the cap. Secure. I tapped the tank with the tire knocker. It rang with a dull, heavy thud. Full. I moved to the engine cowling. The hood of the W900 is a massive fiberglass shell. I unlatched the rubber hold-downs on the side and heaved it open. It tilted forward, exposing the mechanical heart of the beast. I shined the light into the engine bay, tracing the lines. Fuel pump, filter housing, rail. Everything looked fine. No leaks, no frost on the filter. Then I saw the primary supply line. The fuel lines on a Kenworth are braided steel, tough enough to withstand road debris, heat, and pressure. They are connected to the frame rail couplings with heavy brass fittings that require a wrench and a lot of torque to loosen. The supply line coming from the tank wasn't cut. It wasn't slashed by claws or chewed by teeth. It was disconnected. The brass fitting lay resting neatly on the frame rail, completely unthreaded from the housing. There was no damage to the threads, no striations from pliers or tools. I stared at it, my brain refusing to process the geometry. A bear can rip a door off. A wolf can bite through a tire. But to disconnect a fuel line, you need opposable thumbs. You need to understand which way to turn a nut, lefty-loosey. You need to understand that this specific silver hose carries the lifeblood of the machine. This wasn't random damage. This was a mechanic disabling a vehicle. I reached out to touch the loose line. A drop of diesel fuel fell from the open end, landing on the snow. It was still wet. This had happened minutes ago, while I was on the rope. The creature hadn't just escaped the wreck below. It hadn't just run off into the woods. It had climbed up here, assessed the threat, and surgically removed my ability to leave. It didn't want to eat the truck. It wanted to keep me here. A sound behind me made me spin around, raising the tire knocker. Clicking. It was the sound of a door latch, not the truck door. I shined my light toward the sheriff's cruiser. The passenger door of the Explorer was standing wide open, swinging gently in the wind. The interior dome light finally flickered on, weak and yellow. The cruiser was empty, but the snow around it was churned up, a chaotic mess of boot prints and something else. Massive, elongated prints that sank deep into the pack. I looked back at my disabled engine. I could thread the line back on. I could repressurize the system. It would take me 5 minutes. But as I looked at the dark tree line bordering the highway, I knew I didn't have 5 minutes. The Iron Creek warning on the tape played in my head. They learned. I wasn't the recovery team anymore. I was the breakdown, and the mechanic was watching me from the dark. I stared at the brass fitting lying on the frame rail. My brain refused to process the geometry. A bear can rip a door off. A wolf can bite through a tire. But to disconnect a fuel line, you need opposable thumbs. You need to understand mechanics. I realized then that I wasn't dealing with an animal. I was dealing with a saboteur. I'm going to tell you exactly what was standing behind me in the strobe lights in just a second. And trust me, you are not ready for what it looked like. But first, if you want to survive more true horror stories from the deep woods that the authorities try to bury, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. We upload the truth every single day, and you're going to want the backup for what comes next. Now, I gripped the tire knocker in my hand, took a breath and turned around. The amber strobe lights of the rotator sliced through the blizzard in a rhythmic, nauseating pulse. Flash, dark, flash, dark. I stood by the open engine cowling, the disconnected fuel line still dripping diesel onto the snow. My mind was racing, running the numbers on survival probabilities. Fixing the line would take 3 minutes. Getting back into the cab would take 10 seconds. But the creature wasn't going to give me 3 minutes. It wasn't even going to give me 10 seconds. I heard the snow crunch. It wasn't the erratic, crunching sound of a deer or the soft pad of a coyote. It was the heavy, deliberate step of something bipedal, something heavy. I turned slowly, gripping the lead-weighted tire knocker in a white-knuckled fist. It stepped out of the blind spot behind the fuel tank, moving into the strobe light's wash. My brain tried to reject what I was seeing. It tried to tell me it was a man in a ghillie suit, or a bear with mange standing on its hind legs. But bears don't have knees that bend backward, and men don't have muzzles filled with serrated teeth. It was about 7 feet tall, hunched over with a predatory grace. Its fur was a matted grayish-brown mess, slick with melting snow. But it was the chest that drew my eye. Across the pectoral muscles, the fur was burned away, leaving thick, shiny keloid scars in a grid pattern. The fence. The thought flashed through my mind, triggering the memory of the tape I just listened to. We thought the voltage was enough. This thing had walked through the high-voltage perimeter at Iron Creek. It had taken the lightning and kept coming. It didn't roar. It didn't charge. It just stood there 5 feet away, watching me with eyes that glowed a dull, intelligent green. It looked at the disconnected fuel line in my hand, then looked up at my face. Its lips curled back, not in a snarl, but in something that looked terrifyingly like a smirk. It was taking credit. It wanted me to know that it had beaten me. I took a step back, my boots slipping on the ice. The creature took a matching step forward. It was hurting me. It was blocking the path to the driver's side door. It knew that the cab was my sanctuary, and it had positioned itself perfectly to cut off my retreat. I looked at the tire knocker in my hand. It was a solid piece of hickory meant to check tire pressure. Against a meth head with a knife, it was a weapon. Against this, it was a toothpick. The creature lowered its head, dropping to all fours, its shoulders bunched. The play phase was over. It was about to spring. I looked left. The highway was a white wall of death. I couldn't outrun it in deep snow. I looked right. The rotator, a 50-ton wall of steel I couldn't start. I looked behind me, the ravine. The drop was 80 feet. The darkness was absolute. But down there, resting against the limestone, was the only thing in this zip code built to withstand a siege. I threw the tire knocker at the creature's face. It was a distraction, a desperate Hail Mary. The heavy wood spun through the air. The creature didn't flinch. It snatched the club out of the air with a speed that blurred in the strobe light, catching it like a dog catching a frisbee. In that split second of distraction, I didn't run for the truck. I ran for the edge. I sprinted the 10 feet to the guardrail and vaulted over it. A roar erupted behind me, a sound so loud it felt like a physical pressure wave hitting my back. I didn't look to see if it was following. I knew it was. I grabbed the static rope I had left dangling from the bumper. I didn't have time to clip in. I didn't have time to rig the descender. I wrapped the rope around my right forearm, clamped my gloved hands over the line, and jumped. I didn't rappel. I fell, using the friction of the rope to keep from reaching terminal velocity. The leather of my work glove smoked. The heat was instantaneous, searing my palms even through the heavy insulation. I screamed, the sound lost in the wind as I plummeted into the dark. My boots hit the slope about halfway down. I lost my grip on the rope. I tumbled, bouncing off frozen mud and limestone shale. The world became a chaotic spin of black sky and white snow. I slammed into a sapling, heard a rib crack, and kept rolling. I hit the bottom of the ravine with a thud that knocked the wind out of me. I lay there in the deep snow, gasping, tasting copper in my mouth. Above me at the lip of the cliff, a shadow blotted out the strobe lights. The creature was up there. It was looking down. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the sharp stab of pain in my side. The wreck of the armored transport was 20 feet away, a dark monolith in the gloom. I waded through the snow, my legs pumping like pistons in a nightmare. The creature up top let out a howl, a signal. It wasn't alone, or maybe it was just letting me know it was coming down. I reached the wrecked cab. The windshield I had marveled at earlier, the one blown out, was now a gaping, inviting mouth. I grabbed the door handle of the tractor, locked, of course. I grabbed the mirror bracket and hauled myself up onto the side of the truck. I scrambled through the open windshield frame, dropping back into the shredded interior of the cab. The smell of ozone and rot was still there, but now it smelled like safety. I didn't stay in the cab. The windshield was open. It was vulnerable. I squeezed between the driver's seat and the sleeper berth, pushing through the torn curtain. I looked at the rear of the sleeper. There, set into the back wall of the cab, was a heavy steel door, a pass-through to the armored trailer. It was slightly ajar. I shoved my shoulder against it. It was heavy, moving on reinforced hinges. I slipped through the gap into the cargo hold. It was pitch black inside. I fumbled for my maglite, praying it hadn't broken in the fall. I clicked the switch. The beam cut through the darkness. The trailer was empty. No cages, no restraints, just a steel box with tie-down rings on the floor. Whatever had been in here had left long ago. But I wasn't looking for cargo. I was looking for a lock. I grabbed the heavy steel handle of the pass-through door and pulled it shut. It slammed with a reassuringly solid clang. I spun the locking wheel, feeling the deadbolt slide into place. I was locked inside a steel vault at the bottom of a ravine, buried in snow, with a monster hunting me from above. I slumped against the wall, sliding down to the cold metal floor. I was trapped. I was hurt, but I was alive. Then the truck shook. Something heavy had just landed on the side of the trailer. I looked up at the ceiling. The sound of claws scraping against steel reverberated through the box like a violin bow drawn across a chalkboard. It hadn't stayed at the top of the cliff. It had slid down after me, and now it was knocking. The inside of an armored transport trailer is a sensory deprivation tank. It is cold, dark, and acoustically dead. But when a 700-pound nightmare lands on the roof, it sounds like being inside a drum during a parade. Thumping. The trailer shuddered. Dust and rust flakes rained down from the ceiling, invisible in the dark until they hit the beam of my maglite. I killed the light instantly, plunging myself back into the blackness. It was a lizard brain reaction. Hide, be small, be invisible. But the creature didn't need eyes to find me. Scritch, squeal. The sound of claws testing the steel roof was nauseating. It was the sound of a can opener biting into tin, amplified by the enclosed space. It was looking for a seam. It was looking for the rivets. It knew I was inside, just like a raccoon knows there's trash in a locked bin. It was just a matter of puzzle solving, and from what I'd seen of the fuel line, this thing was a quick study. I sat with my back pressed against the wheel well, clutching the heavy tire knocker like a talisman. My breathing was ragged, loud in the silence. I tried to hold it, but the adrenaline was pumping through me so hard I felt like I was vibrating. I was trapped, 80 feet down, buried in snow, inside a steel coffin with a monster peeling the lid off. Think, I whispered, the word barely forming on my lips. Work the problem. I ran the inventory. My truck was dead on the cliff above. My escape rope was gone. The sheriff was likely dead. The trailer was sealed. I was dead weight. Then something poked me in the hip. It was a hard, rectangular lump in the pocket of my Carhartt jacket. I shifted my weight, reaching down with a trembling hand. My fingers brushed the cold plastic of the remote control. The LADAR 9000 wireless remote. I froze. My mind flashed back to 10 minutes ago, a lifetime ago, when I had touched down in the snow. Before I had climbed into the cab to check the air brakes, I had done what 20 years of recovery work had drilled into my muscle memory. I had stabilized the casualty. I had wrapped a grade 70 transport chain around the brush guard of the wrecked truck and hooked it to the main winch line of my rotator. It was automatic. You never enter a wreck on a slope without tethering it, just in case your weight shifts the balance. The truck was hooked up, and I had the control in my pocket. I pulled the remote out. A tiny green LED blinked on the faceplate. It was still paired. It still had a signal. But the rotator's engine was dead. The primary hydraulic pump, the one that generates the massive pressure needed to lift 50 tons, runs off the PTO, the power takeoff, which spins with the transmission. No engine, no PTO. No PTO, no hydraulics. Except for the backup. I stared at the remote in the dark. The Century 1060 comes with an emergency power unit, an EPU. It's a 12-volt electric motor connected to a small hydraulic pump, designed to stow the boom and winches if the main engine fails catastrophically. It's slow, it's loud, and it drains the batteries like a gunshot wound drains blood. I had maybe 5 minutes of juice before the batteries up top died completely. Above me, the screeching of metal grew louder. The roof buckled inward. I could hear the heavy, wet breathing of the creature as it worked the steel, peeling it back like a sardine lid. A sliver of gray light from the blizzard appeared in the ceiling, followed by a long, black claw that hooked the jagged edge of the hole. It was breaking in. I thumbed the power button on the remote. The green light turned solid. I didn't pray. I looked at the ceiling, right at the spot where the roof was deforming under the monster's weight, and I pressed the button marked Winch 1I in. I couldn't hear the electric pump start up 80 feet above me in the storm, but I felt the result instantly. Physics took over. The 7/8-inch steel cable, strung tight from the top of the cliff to the nose of the wreck, suddenly woke up. The electric motor groaned, applying 10,000 pounds of tension in a split second. Twang! The sound of the cable pulling tight was like a gunshot. The wrecked truck didn't just slide, it lurched. The massive armored beast jerked forward about 6 inches, dragging its belly over the limestone rocks. The effect on the roof was immediate. The creature, balanced on 2 legs and pulling at the metal with both hands, wasn't expecting the ground to move. I heard a startled yelp, a sound that was satisfyingly undignified, followed by the heavy thud-scrape thud of a large body losing its footing and sliding down the side of the trailer. I didn't let off the button. "Come on," I gritted out, watching the winch indicator light blink. "Pull, you son of a bitch." The EPU whined. The cable sang. The wreck groaned, the metal complaining as it was dragged uphill against the friction of the deep snow and the rock face. We were moving. Slowly, painfully, but we were moving. I heard the creature hit the ground outside with a wet crunch. It shrieked, a sound of pure, confused rage. It had hunted deer, bears, maybe even armed men, but it had never hunted something that fought back with hydraulics. I dragged the truck another 3 feet, grinding it against the limestone wall of the ravine. The friction caused the whole trailer to shudder, vibrating my teeth. I let off the button. The silence rushed back in, heavy and sudden. I waited. Outside, the snow crunched. The heavy breathing returned. It was close. It was right next to the trailer wall. It slammed a fist against the side of the box, denting the steel right next to my head. Wham! It was angry now. It knew I was doing this. It knew the dead truck was alive. I waited for it to climb back up. I could hear its claws scrabbling on the metal, finding purchase on the rivets. It was scaling the side again, faster this time. It wasn't going to peel the roof gently. It was going to tear it apart. I fingered the remote. I had changed the equation. I wasn't trapped in a box anymore. I was the pilot of a 20-ton wrecking ball. I listened to the scratching. It was moving toward the front, toward the tractor. It was going for the windshield again. It realized that the roof was too hard, so it was going back to the hole it had already made. I smiled in the dark. It was a smart monster, but it didn't know how a winch worked. It didn't know that by climbing onto the hood, it was putting itself directly between the truck and the anchor point. It was walking right into the pinch point. I watched the gap in the pass-through door. I waited for the shadow to blot out the gray light coming from the cab. "Come on," I whispered, "get on the hook." I watched the small, rectangular window of the pass-through door like a sniper watching a kill zone. The heavy steel door was locked, the deadbolts thrown, but I knew they wouldn't hold forever. If that thing wanted in bad enough, it would peel the metal back like a sardine can. But it had to get to the door first. The scratching on the roof stopped. For a long, agonizing moment, there was only the sound of the wind howling 80 feet above and the settling groans of the wrecked chassis. Then the truck shifted slightly, a subtle dip in the suspension on the front end. It was climbing onto the hood. I gripped the remote control, my thumb hovering over the rubberized button. My hand was shaking, but my mind was ice cold. I wasn't fighting a monster anymore. I was solving a rigging problem. I had a load, I had an anchor, and I had a vector of force. A shadow fell across the pass-through window, blotting out the faint gray light of the blizzard. It was huge. Through the thick safety glass of the small window, I saw movement. It was squeezing itself through the broken windshield of the tractor, slithering into the cab I had just vacated. I heard the crunch of plastic dashboard trim breaking under its weight. It was inside the tractor now, separated from me only by the pass-through door. A face appeared in the window. It was hideous, a road map of scars and rage. The amber eyes were inches away, staring at me through the glass. It snarled, a spray of saliva hitting the window, and raised a massive, clawed fist to strike. Bang! The glass spiderwebbed. It didn't shatter, but it wouldn't take a second hit. The creature drew its arm back for the killing blow, its chest heaving, its focus entirely on the prey trapped in the box. It had forgotten where it was standing. It was standing on the tractor, positioned perfectly between the cab and the massive limestone outcrop the truck was wedged against. It had entered the crush zone. "Physics check," I whispered. I pressed the button. Winch 1 in. Up on the cliff, the emergency electric pump screamed to life, drawing the last reserves of the dying batteries. The cable, already taut, sang a high-pitched note of tension that vibrated through the frame of the truck. The reaction was violent. The winch didn't just pull the truck up, it pulled it in. The cable was routed through a snatch block on my boom, creating an angle of pull that dragged the nose of the wreck hard to the right, directly toward the limestone wall. The truck lurches with the force of a tectonic plate shifting. The creature's eyes went wide. The second blow never landed. The floor it was standing on, the side of the cab, suddenly became a moving wall. The truck slammed sideways, closing the 3-foot gap between the steel cab and the solid rock face in a fraction of a second. Crunch! It wasn't a wet sound. It was the sound of structural failure. It was the sound of aluminum crumpling, fiberglass shattering, and something organic popping under the pressure of 20 tons of moving steel. The truck shuddered and stopped, pinned tight against the rock. A howl erupted, but it was cut short, choked off into a wet, gurgling wheeze. The truck vibrated as the creature thrashed, trapped in the vise. I could hear claws scraping frantically against the rock and the metal, a desperate, scrabbling sound that grew weaker by the second. I kept my thumb mashed on the button. I could hear the electric motor on the cliff dying, the whine dropping in pitch as the voltage sagged. The cables were groaning, stretched to their breaking point. "Don't you die on me," I gritted out, "squeeze." The truck groaned one last time, settling another inch into the rock face. The thrashing stopped. Then the remote's green light flickered and died. The EPU had drained the batteries dry. The winch motor up top fell silent. Silence rushed back into the ravine, heavier than before. I sat there in the dark, breathing hard, listening. I waited for the scratching to start again. I waited for the roar. I waited for the truck to shake. Nothing. Just the wind, and the sound of the truck's frame settling into its new position. I lowered the remote. My thumb was white where I had pressed the button. I didn't cheer. You don't cheer when you win a fight with gravity, you just survive it. I moved to the pass-through window and shone my maglite through the spider-webbed glass. The view was obscured by the cracks, but I could see a dark, matted shape pressed tight against the glass, motionless. A black liquid was pooling on the other side, leaking through the cracks in the dashboard. I had pinned it. The rotator had dragged the armored cab right into the cliff face, crushing the space where the driver's seat and the monster had been. I checked my watch. The batteries were dead. My truck was dead. I was 80 feet down in a blizzard with no rope and a crushed monster for company, but the immediate threat was neutralized. Now came the part that terrified me almost as much as the creature, the climb out. I grabbed the handle of the pass-through door. I had to go out through the cab. It was the only way. I had to squeeze past the thing I had just killed to get to the hood, and then scramble up the rock face before the rest of the migration showed up. I turned the locking wheel and kicked the door open. It hit something soft and heavy. I shoved harder, adrenaline giving me the strength to push the obstruction aside. I stepped into the ruined cab. The smell was atrocious: iron, musk, and spilled diesel. The creature was wedged between the crumpled roof and the rock wall, its body broken in ways that anatomy shouldn't allow. I didn't look at its face. I didn't want to see if the eyes were still open. I climbed over the dashboard, stepping on broken glass and matted fur, and squeezed out through the shattered windshield frame. I hit the snow and looked up. The cliff face was steep, slick with ice, and daunting. But without the monster hunting me, it was just another job. It was just leverage and friction. I started to climb, leaving the black box, the dead truck, and the dead king at the bottom of the world. The climb out of the ravine was harder than the fall. Without the rope, I had to claw my way up the limestone face, finding handholds in the frozen mud and leveraging my boots against tree roots that stuck out like exposed ribs. My lungs burned in the frigid air, and every muscle in my body screamed in protest, but the adrenaline kept me moving. I didn't look down. I knew what was down there. I knew that even crushed between 20 tons of steel and stone, monsters have a way of haunting you if you stare at them too long. I crested the lip of the highway and rolled onto the asphalt, gasping for air. The blizzard was still raging, but the wind felt different now, less like an enemy and more like a curtain closing on the stage. I didn't waste time. I sprinted to the rotator. The amber strobes were dead. The batteries finally drained completely, leaving the massive truck as a dark, silent monolith in the snow. I grabbed the loose fuel line hanging from the frame rail. My hands were shaking so violently, I dropped the brass fitting twice before I managed to line it up with the housing. I stripped off my heavy work gloves, exposing my skin to the biting cold, needing the tactile feedback to thread the nut. Righty-tighty. I wrenched it down until the brass bit into the seat, sealing the system. I climbed into the cab and locked the door. I pumped the manual primer on the dash, pressurizing the lines, praying the air bubble hadn't reached the injectors. "Come on," I whispered, turning the key. The starter groaned, slower this time, fighting the cold and the drained voltage. Ar-rar-rar, ar-rar-rar, ar-rar-rar. Then a cough, a shudder, and finally the deep, thunderous roar of the Cummins ISX catching life. I didn't wait for the air pressure to build fully. I slammed the truck into gear and released the maxi brakes. The rotator lurched forward, tires spinning on the ice before biting down. I didn't look at the sheriff's empty cruiser as I passed it. I didn't look at the guardrail gap where the Iron Creek transport lay buried. I just drove. I drove south. I drove until the snow turned to sleet, and the sleet turned to a cold, miserable rain. I crossed the state line as the sun began to bruise the eastern sky with a dull, gray light. I didn't go home. I couldn't go home, not with the smell of ozone and old copper still clinging to my clothes. I pulled into a truck stop diner near the Arkansas border, a neon sign buzzing in the mist. My hands were still trembling as I killed the engine. I sat there for a moment, listening to the silence, feeling the phantom vibration of the winch cable in my palms. I walked inside. The diner was empty except for a waitress counting tips at the register and a single patron sitting in a booth near the window. He was wearing a tan uniform, a sheriff's deputy. I froze. My instinct was to turn around and walk out. I didn't want to answer questions. I didn't want to explain why my 50-ton truck was covered in tree sap and limestone dust. But then I saw the file on the table in front of him. It wasn't a ticket book. It was a thick, weathered manila folder, spilling over with photos. Grainy black and white photos of things that looked like bears but stood like men. photos of cattle torn in half, photos of claw marks on steel. I walked over to the booth. The deputy looked up. He was older, with gray at his temples and eyes that looked like they had seen the same darkness I had just climbed out of. He didn't look surprised to see me. He looked like a man who was waiting for the next piece of bad news. I glanced at his name tag, Jackson. I didn't introduce myself. I didn't ask if he was local or if he was chasing ghosts. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the silver digital dictaphone I had taken from the wreck. It felt heavy, heavier than plastic and circuitry should feel. I slid it across the Formica table. It stopped right next to his coffee cup. "Found this in a wreck about 100 miles north," I said, my voice raspy from the smoke and the cold. Truck had no plates. The logo on the door said Iron Creek Logistics, Canadian outfit. Jackson looked at the device, then up at me. His expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He knew the name. "Iron Creek," he repeated, his voice a low rumble. "That's a long way from home." "Not anymore," I said. "The driver," he left a recording. "He said they aren't just hunting, he said they're migrating." Jackson picked up the dictaphone. He turned it over in his hands, inspecting it with a grim reverence like a priest handling a holy relic. He didn't ask me what happened to the truck. He didn't ask me what happened to the cargo. He looked at the scratches on my jacket, the soot on my face, and he did the math. "Did you stop it?" Jackson asked quietly. "I stopped the truck," I said, "but the recording, it says there were others following it. It says the Alpha was just the lead vehicle." Jackson nodded slowly. He opened his manila folder and dropped the dictaphone inside, nestled among the photos of the nightmares he had spent a lifetime tracking. "Go home, son," Jackson said. "Get off the road, lock your doors." "Is that gonna help?" I asked. Jackson looked out the window at the rain sweeping across the parking lot, toward the dark tree line of the deep south. "No," he said, "but it makes you feel better while you wait." I turned and walked out of the diner. I climbed back into my rotator and pulled out onto the highway. The road ahead was long and gray, stretching down into the Mississippi Delta. I checked my mirrors one last time. The road behind me was empty, but I knew that wouldn't last. The truck was stopped. The black box was delivered, but the migration had just begun.